Hello, this is Hit Pause, a podcast made in San Francisco with more questions than answers. Hello and welcome to Hit Pause, a podcast where we meet regularly and discuss things of the social media, technology, and human sphere. I'm recording this podcast on a very windy day here in San Francisco, in my home office, and you may hear the wind behind me. This is not a professional studio, so thank you for bearing with me. This is real life. We've been having a very beautiful sunny day, sunny past couple of days, but the wind is with us tonight. I'm going to also state and announce that I will probably be pushing the podcast on a weekly basis during the night of Monday to Tuesday. So for those of you in Europe, you'll be able to pick it up as early as Tuesday morning, as well as those going to bed late at night in California or on Tuesday morning as well. Today, I'll be talking a little bit about the advent of social media and try to bring you on a personal experience and journey through the advent of that new form of media. Over the past couple of podcast episodes, we looked at the story of media, the story of broadcast medium through the ages, the acceleration of the change of media formats, and today we're doing a slightly deeper dive on the accelerated timeline that social media has embarked us on. It's fascinating that we spent a couple of episodes looking at thousands of years of media history through the ages, but today we're going to see that the past 15 years really have accelerated so much change in how we create, transmit, receive, and respond to media. Little quiz of a question, I guess. Do you remember when social media was born, at least in its recent modern form with the new technologies? Well, I'll bring you back to a date, December 17, 2005. And that is the date when YouTube, that had been born no sooner than, or no longer, than a year before, ended up posting its first viral video. And it was an episode of a SNL, Saturday Night Live digital short, which was called Lazy Sunday. And that went viral. And I will argue that this is really the birth of modern social media, in the sense that that very simple piece of video, I remember seeing it at the time. Interestingly enough, I don't have much memory of it right now, but it was clear that at the time something was changing. Suddenly the people clicking the like button and the counter of views was going up quickly, and something was happening that had not been seen yet. The moment social media, the way we know it, was born. And what is interesting is that a couple of months later, in May, NBC sent a cease and desist letter to YouTube asking for the removal of that piece of video. We'll come back to that as we look at the business models and the monetization of social media and video on the internet. But it was really a moment, a heretic moment, a moment in breaking the mold of old broadcast media and doing something which was technically forbidden, that actually was meeting a consumer demand that was pent up. It was the first time that we had the eruption of a new consumer usage brought by new technology, the streaming of video over the internet. Fast forward a couple of more years later, and Twitter came about. And I'll be the first to admit that I did not understand Twitter. Maybe it's because I'm a French poet. I like to write. I like to think about the meaning of words. I like to develop long sentences. And I come from a culture where we have Proust, who was able to write and wrote books with sentences that could be so long and taking the entire page with some punctuation, but you could develop ideas in those day and age in a very, very long form format. So Twitter comes about and tells us you can only write messages that are 140 characters. And again, that was another heretic moment, the heretics taking power of changing the media formats and forcing a change, a radical change in how media was created, was transmitted, and could be consumed. And I remember my emotions of the time. I was literally shocked and offended that a new upstart company could come up with that new format. Fast forward a couple of more years later, and here comes Snap. And this time, Snap tells us, in the video you're going to share, in the video message you're going to share, I'm going to constrain you to 10 seconds. I remember precisely the first time where my friend Guts invited me for dinner at his house, and we were around the kitchen table, and he showed me Snap for the first time. And again, I had a personal, visceral reaction of being offended because there was such heresy in taking a media format, which had been the story of my professional career to date, broadcast long-form video, high-quality movies, high-quality television capable of sustaining high compression, high quality on HD channels, on DirecTV, on digital set-top boxes. And suddenly now the format is changed again radically with a constraint of 10 seconds. And it took me years to start having or comprehending that those entrepreneurs were actually tapping into something which was very, very profound and very visceral. And I was not understanding those new format disruptions because I was trying to analyze them in my head and not feeling the powerful impact that those media formats could have emotionally. And again, I'll come back to the episode 3 of last time at the fact that a media format is mostly a container for emotions. And that by radically changing the container and the format, those entrepreneurs were frankly tapping into a reservoir of emotions that would be used in a very different way than everything else that we humans had been exposed to. I have to give homage to someone who had a vision of what the internet could become, and many others around, of course, Tim Berners-Lee and Al Gore, who years before even created a TV company, now defunct. We may have, or many out there may have forgotten the name or maybe never been exposed to the name, but there was a TV broadcast channel company called Current TV, and Al Gore, after he left politics, was its chairman. And Al Gore and his team of producers tried to create a TV format that was not the traditional 1 hour format, but that was basically a container of 20 minutes that they were even imagining possibly be cutting into even smaller segments of 7 minutes, because the theory at the time was going that the new internet generation of the year 2000 was to consume smaller bits of content. And this was the beginning and the transition from the traditional flip phone and the smartphone to the first phones that were able to start playing a little bit of video. We had companies in the Silicon Valley like MobiTV, and they were already recognizing it was the beginning of that transition to a world of media, that the consumption on a mobile phone was much shorter than on front of the TV set. We had, and we were observing in the television industry, humongous discrepancies between the advertised 5 hours of television audience watching. Those were the traditional classic TV ratings numbers from Nielsen, to 3 minutes on the mobile phone. And so on one hand, traditional old broadcast media claiming and defending 5 hours, and on the other hand, new emerging renegades daring to tell us that 3 minutes was enough and you could build a business on top of 3 minutes, 100 characters, and even 10 seconds. And so the first lesson for me here is that format changes are fundamentally market openers, and that the ownership, the definition of a media format is a business and a market disruption much more than it is a technology disruption. And during the advent of those new media formats, the second predicate that I'm observing is that they occurred and they happened by putting the tools of creation into the hands of the many. When we look at social media, obviously, we think of it as connecting, having friends, sharing. But something fundamentally radical, again, maybe heretic, changed when social media came about. It actually democratized or brought into the hands of many cheap tools to become themselves a broadcaster. And what is fascinating in that world is that it maybe took 5-10 years for everybody to realize, sure, I can upload a video on YouTube. And God knows, I remember those days in the first decenny of our century right now, the 21st century. I remember lots of conversations where everybody was realizing, and there were lots of cats videos on YouTube. There was a lot of hard disk drive that was being consumed to store little videos that had no meaning other than to an audience of 3 or 4 or 5 people. And yet the system was working. And yet it was becoming fairly clear fairly fast that a small pool of super creators, of advanced creators, of quality creators was emerging, And when I remember looking at the statistics that many of the startups in that space were showing me, either as I was advising them or as I was talking to venture capitalists, or even looking at them as potential partners in the businesses where I was employed, I remember seeing those extremely steep asymptote curves where you had the classic curve of 2 to 3% of the audience, of the community of users, being super creators, creating 70-80% of the content that was being viewed, followed by an extremely long tail of 97% of users and creators that did not have much reach. And this is the curve in which we live. And what strikes me is that in that new world of social media, the actual proportion seems to be about the same, I'm sure, of those who could read, who could write in the Middle Ages, of those who could write on papyrus during the times of the Egyptians. So the transmission and the creation at high velocity of content seems to be remaining in that world of social media extremely reserved to a minority. And so what does that mean to the fundamentals of social media? Is that you look at creators, you look at receptors who are sure all having the possibility of becoming a creator, and everybody has posted a picture online, everybody has maybe uploaded a video or shared a video online with friends. So everybody's an emitter, but the emitters who become super creators or rise to the surface are really few and far between. So there is something powerful to be told around here, which is probably the force of the content itself. Ultimately, we remain as human beings driven by stories, by storytelling, and the ability to captivate an audience. We don't have a campfire anymore. We're not in a cave anymore. But the ability to transmit a message that resonates is probably and continues to be the driving force of social media. So with social media, we find ourselves at a time of a disruption in media formats. We find ourselves at a time of democratization of the ability to create. But we also find ourselves at a time of permanence of the fundamentals of human communication and the necessity of solid content. And now, let's go to a short break to hit pause, reflect, or just continue. And welcome back to the second segment of our fourth installment of the podcast Hit Pause. We looked at a little bit of the key three tenets of social media just now, and taking a little bit of a look into the outside eye, I can also see and say that in hindsight, it's a little easier to look at the history of things and to try to draw conclusions and lessons. But what is also fascinating is that when you're inside the change becomes much harder to notice, to see, to understand. I mentioned that I personally was not understanding with my head the changes that were afoot in the social media breakthroughs when they came. 140 characters, 10 seconds, those were so heretic statements about the form of media, and I was not alone. I remember when I was a young executive in the Silicon Valley, a couple of years after having arrived here in the Bay Area, I had seen by then my first internet page, of course, on the Stanford campus on a Mozilla browser. And I had been invited to a lunch with a French delegation I can say it now, there's a little bit of prescription of France Telecom. And those executives at the time were still running a large business with the Minitel services. A lot of the French people of the Valley, and of course in France, will remember the Minitel. It's lesser known in the United States, but it was the precursor to the internet in the sense of a closed loop system that had servers where publishers could publish a built-in board, all alphanumeric based, black and white screens, terminal installed in the consumer home, connected to the old analog phone line with a modem. We did not have the modem sound at the time of the AOL prompt, but in its day and age, it was built-in board services, some of them being paid. And I remember the France Telecom executives coming to the Bay Area, discovering the internet and discussing with us its implications. And I remember that quote to this day, about close to maybe 20 years later, if not more, where one of them said, "What do you think the French unemployed people will do on the internet? Look for a job?" And that was, at the time, something that shocked me in the ability that we can have as human beings to develop blind spots when we do not want to see the reality that is smacking us in our face. And that was a moment of the Silicon Valley that has stayed with me. I can understand its reasons. I can understand that that business was running a P&L with an existing technology, and they had the perennial problem of revenue lines shifting and transitioning an existing business to another. It's the age-old story of capitalism. But the mere shock to the system that this new internet technology was promising to be was so humongous to swallow that the gut, again, was blinding the mind to absorb its consequences. That's clearly a story that has stayed with me. A few years later, as I was working for a company involved with software running in set-top boxes, cable and satellite set-top boxes, we were working on the transition of broadcast TV to on-demand TV to video on demand, and all the distribution of data that could go along with that video stream to make ultimately TV interactive. And I remember thinking, theorizing, product managing roadmaps and visions at the time, driving towards a point which I could call no better than, at the time, Me TV. I was seeing confusedly that when you were making those broadcast systems capable of two-way communication, when you were combining somehow the ability of a receptor of signals to become an emitter of signal, you were going into a world of every television audience member becoming a television producer, and therefore MeTV was my confused uh, or haphazard way of saying, in that new world in which we're entering, we will become TV producers. Andy Warhol, of course, said everybody will have their 15 minutes of fame. But we're talking here about 1999 and the year 2000, even 5 years before YouTube. It so happens that, of course, the forms of those broadcast medium and technology advances did not take the road of a cable system where you would speak or broadcast from your television. I remember a lot of those conversations where cable operators were working on systems that would enable their audience to place video conference calls from in front of their TV set. That use case never took flight because the mobile phone came with the ability to create and to become that camera in your hand, suddenly appending huge media conglomerates and deporting that MeTV into the palm of your hand. And again, here the head was going in the right direction, sometimes with blind spots, but it's the emotive reaction of the consumer of the media that was really the driving force of this social media wave that was upon us. So for tonight, I will finish with one question that will remain floating a bit in the air to think about, to ponder. And that question is, what is it that true core entrepreneurs see? And how do they see it? How do they tap into that collective subconscious? How do they tap into the animus of an entire audience, of an entire consumer end user population, into the air du temps, like we say in French? What is it that they tap into that is not cortical, that is not cortex-based, but that touches the guts, that touches the emotions, and that trigger a visceral reaction for users and consumers, all of us in fact, to start changing behavior, to start changing how we consume media, to start changing how we do things. This podcast is a simple way of sharing my thoughts. It is a personal endeavor, nothing more, a way to connect. The views and opinions represented in this podcast are solely mine. They are in no way, nor should they be assumed to be shared, supported, endorsed by my employer, the sponsors of this show, Anchor.fm, where it is hosted, and all the distributors thereof. You may find more information, links, pictures, videos, documents, and more, which may have been referenced in this podcast, on my website at www.uteza.com/podcast. There, it feels so much better after saying all of this. And so, it's time to part ways, at least for now. Until next time, time to say goodnight, time to hit pause.